Great, Charlie. Wynn here from Orchard Coaching, and really pleased to be here. So the question is how do you define business strategy, and how do you link it back to your vision, mission, and values? The first place that I will always start is with people's vision, and I will spend as much time as needed to understand what their vision. And when I say vision, it's usually a 3 or maybe a 5 year, depending on the size of the organization and the maturity of the organization. But ultimately, it is defining what that vision is and spend as much time as needed to get to that point. So the reason we start there is that's usually what's in people's head. And even if they already have their values and mission in place, then we can validate it against those. So even if they don't have them, ultimately their vision is actually a translation of their existing values and mission. What we then do is if they don't have their values and mission actually written down, we then next spend the time in actually working through those and defining them and bringing them to life. And I will then also validate the mission and the values against their vision and spend that time ensuring that it is actually linked and that it's not contradictory or necessarily unrealistic or unable to be clearly communicated. So really that is the beginning point of developing your strategy, is understanding first your vision, validating it against your values and your mission in particular. But of course, it is then validating and linking those values and that mission back to the existing context and the vision. So it's starting in the future, and then you bring it back into the current day, and then linking through and validating what that mission and those core values are. And I say core values, which is really your internal business values. And with small businesses, it is usually almost always a reflection of that key person, either the owner or the CEO, their personal values, usually almost always, particularly with small businesses, that's the case. As you get larger as a business, then it needs to be a reflection of the core values, particularly of that leadership team or that key team that is leading that organization. So that's where we start, is understanding that vision. We then will spend time doing what we call an external scan, which could be using a tool like Porter's Five Forces is one that people probably are aware of. I often will use a FEES or a future external environmental scan and get the key people to do a skeptic analysis, which is looking at the society, the competition, the economics, the political and regulatory environment, the technology, the industry, and of course your customers, and analysing in all those dimensions. When I say analysing, understanding your current context and looking and checking whether the vision is realistic within that space. And we may then iterate back again through that vision and not necessarily shift it, but probably refine it and make sure it's more realistic. Once we've done that and we've validated that it is feasible to bring this vision to life within the space that we're looking at, that includes your mission, includes your values, it's then breaking that down into smaller time. And usually what we'll start with is 1 year, and we'll then bring those long-term, I call them long-term goals, or the goals that for the year, and we'll bring that to life. Again, we'll validate it back against the vision, the mission, and the values, ensuring that they are that they're working. What we'll then usually do is a SWOT analysis. We'll then understand those annual goals and do a strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats analysis. Again, that's an internal and an external scan. Since we've done the fees analysis pretty recently, means that shouldn't be too hard or too quick. What we'll then do is then, of the goals, we then work on some key strategic initiatives, which are those key projects, if you will, and we will prioritize them and ensure that we understand what is most of those top 3 key strategic initiatives that we have to get done in the year to have the biggest impact on achieving those annual goals that we have identified as key to ensuring that we're achieving that long-term 3 to 5 year vision that we've previously identified. And then once we have those key strategic initiatives, what we then do is probably do another analysis, which I call a seeds, weeds, and needs analysis, which is identifying what are the things that we need to plant now, kick off quickly. What are the weeds we need to pull out? What are the things we need to stop doing ultimately? And needs, what do we need to bring on in the future? So the seeds are things that we can do now in the business, and needs are things that we have to work towards to bring in. So it might be deciding to outsource something, or seeds might be saying, look, we need to develop this team internally and kick that off and start that. So then what we'll then do is the two final bits is to then bring in some short-term goals, usually in a quarter, or maybe a half year, depending on exactly what they are, and bring them to life by making sure they're smart, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. And the final one is to then develop the action plan. And then the action plan is assigning it to individuals or assigning it to a team. And alongside that is a strategic initiative approach is the phrase I've used, which is then how are we going to measure it? What's the cadence of measuring it? Are we going to be using KPIs? Are we going to be using a project execution approach? Are we going to outsource some of that work? Are we going to bring in specific individuals or teams or organizations to help bring that to life? How is it going to look like? And then how do we ensure that it actually occurs? So that's really how you define your strategy. And your strategy ultimately is those key strategic initiatives. So they could be pillars. Some people call them pillars inside an organization, which is ultimately your key focus. And once those key strategic initiatives are developed from the vision and then broken down further ultimately into those. But you have two things. You have those key strategic initiatives and the priority of those within the organization. And that really is ultimately your strategy to bring that to life. Hopefully that's been of some use, and that is how I would work with organizations that need to focus on that part of their business to create that clarity. And it's often a place we'll start when people have ideas, have a vision, but are unclear of how to necessarily bring that to life for the rest of the organization, or sometimes, for investors, or necessarily for people that they may be trying to bring on board, or outsourcing, as I kind of mentioned. That's the key way we'd achieve in bringing a strategy to life.